I will give you one passage from the Gospels that might seem like contradiction, and is related to the narration about the transfiguration of Jesus. All right, welcome to AJ Sports with Ezekiel. And Ezekiel, thank you so much for coming around. I hope that you will definitely be impacted by all that you listen to on this very episode of AJ Sports with Ezekiel. Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. I hope the past week was a good week for you. Thank you so much for coming around to another episode of AJ Sports with Ezekiel. And today we are going to be taking a look at the topic, can I trust the Gospel's account about the life of Jesus Christ? And we know that the Greek word for gospel is euangelion, which basically means good news, good announcement. And so the Gospels in the Bible are good news and announcement about the life of Jesus Christ, from his birth down to his earthly ministry and then his death and resurrection. That's what the Gospels are all about. We have 4 Gospels in the New Testament in the Bible. We have the Gospel according to Matthew, the Gospel according to Mark, the Gospel according to Luke, and the Gospel according to John. Before we go further into the test you can use to know whether you can trust the Bible, I would be giving basic information about these 4 Gospels, starting with the Gospel of Matthew. And many early church fathers agree that it was written by Matthew, one of Jesus Christ's disciples. However, some other Bible scholars say Matthew couldn't have been written by Matthew. That's the Gospel of Matthew couldn't have been written by Matthew because the Gospel of Matthew supposedly depends on the Gospel of Mark because of the number of similarities in the text. They ask, why would Matthew need to depend on Mark's account? Because Matthew is one of Jesus Christ's disciples, so why can't he write his own gospel from scratch? The Gospel of Matthew was written around 50 AD. However, some say it was written in 60 AD, and those who believe that the Gospel of Matthew heavily depends on the Gospel of Mark believe that it was written as late as 75 AD. The Gospel of Matthew appears to be written specifically to the Jews to convince them that Jesus was the Messiah prophesied about in the Old Testament. Matthew starts his Gospel by showing how Jesus Christ is from the lineage of David. And then in other passages, you hear things like, this happened to fulfill the word of the Lord by prophet Isaiah, Jeremiah, or some other prophet. You can see that in passages like Matthew chapter 1 verse 22, Matthew 2:15, Matthew 2:23, and so many other passages in the book of Matthew. Right now we go to the Gospel according to Mark, which is believed to have been written by John Mark. John Mark is the same person that is referred to in Acts chapter 12 verse 12 and Acts chapter 15 verse 37. He was a close associate with the believers in the early church. According to early Christian fathers like Papias of Hierapolis, John Mark got most of his Gospel's accounts from Peter and his preaching to the early church. They say that the Gospel of Mark was written around 70 AD. Those who believe that the Gospel of Matthew and Luke depends on the Gospel of Mark believe it was written around 50 to 60 AD. You see, the Gospel of Mark focuses on Jesus' earthly ministry from his baptism to his death and resurrection. It's believed to have been written to believers in Rome who were going through persecutions to let them know that Jesus Christ himself was also persecuted and killed by the religious and governing leaders of his time. Now we go to the Gospel according to Luke. The Gospel according to Luke is believed to have been written by Luke, who is also the author of Acts of the Apostles. And according to Colossians 4:14, we know that Luke is one of Apostle Paul's close friends. Luke is believed to have been written between 50 to 63 AD. And some people also claim again it was written as late as 70 to 80 AD. The Gospel of Luke was particularly written to a person named Theophilus, and we see that from Luke chapter 1 verse 3. According to Luke, he carefully investigated all that he was reporting in his account about the life of Jesus. Now, we go to the Gospel according to John. The Gospel according to John was written by John, who was also a disciple of Jesus. And some dates is writing to the period close to the end of the first century, like around 85 AD. While some other people believe that the Gospel of John was written earlier than 70 AD, because there's a passage in the Gospel of John, that is John chapter 5 verse 2. John 5:2 says, "Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches." People say that Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. And if John wrote his gospel after Jerusalem was destroyed, then he would not say "now there is," but he would say "now there was at Jerusalem." So this is why some people believe that the Gospel of John was written way early than 70 AD. The book of John has a deeper theology than all the Gospels, and it reveals the divine nature of Jesus as God dwelling with humans. That's why you see the way the book of John starts. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning, and everything that was made by Him. So those are the 4 Gospels, the Gospel according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Why are there speculations about the authors and even the dates of writings for these Gospels? The answer is this. First of all, the people who the Gospels were written to knew exactly who wrote the Gospel. And 2, in that time, there was nothing like authors and publishers' details where you will see Gospel written by Matthew in 50 AD. All rights reserved, no portion of this book. No, that wasn't what was common then. But the people knew who wrote the Gospel. And as the church began to grow, the Gospels were recopied. And that is why we have several Greek manuscripts from various portions of the Gospels, because they were spreading this message around. But then, how did these 4 Gospels get to be accepted in the Bible as we have it today? I mean, there are other Gospels like Gospel of Truth, Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Philip. Why were they not accepted? Here are 3 tests that the early church fathers used in determining whether a gospel is accepted into the Bible. The first test is, was it written by an apostle or a close associate of an apostle? The next test is that, was it in agreement with the Old Testament and the apostolic oral traditions? That's the preachings and the teachings of the apostles. Was these acclaimed gospels teaching the truth, or they were spreading heresy? Was it in line with the Old Testament and the teachings, or was it in contradiction? Another one is, was it used by the churches around where the books were written in the early church? Then it most likely is true and reliable and was accepted by church fathers into the New Testament as we have it today. Now, there are 5 tests to know whether the Gospels are historically accurate and reliable. And number 1 test is eyewitness account. If you are learning about anything from ancient past, who is reporting it? Were they eyewitness, or did they know eyewitnesses? Because when somebody is charged with a crime and they are trying to investigate whether the claims of anyone is valid or not, they'll ask, are there eyewitnesses? And then from the 4 Gospels, we know that Matthew and John are disciples of Jesus Christ. Mark and Luke were close associates of the apostles of the early church. Another test is the literary style of writing. How is the narrative written? Is it written like a fictional story? Once upon a time, in a land far away, beyond where the humans had ever traveled to. Is that how the Gospels are written? No. The Gospels are written like historical narrative, giving specific time, specific names, specific places. That shows that these accounts are embedded into historical events that can be confirmed. Another test that you can use to know whether the Gospels are historically accurate and reliable is internal consistency. Are all the Gospels contradicting one another? Does Matthew say one thing and Mark reports another thing and Luke reports a different thing and John reports a completely different thing from all the other Gospels? Not at all. Some people might say the Gospels are full of contradictions here and there, but that is not true. In the Gospel of Matthew, you might have such and such details. And then in the Gospel of Mark, Mark provides more details. That does not mean Matthew was wrong. Or Luke might decide not to even mention specific names and things, but he also talks about the event. That doesn't mean any of them are wrong. That is complementing one another. In fact, a good example is when Jesus Christ was taken to Pilate and Herod when the soldiers mocked him. I think Matthew says they beat Jesus, they slapped him, and they asked him to prophesy. Who slapped him? If Jesus Christ could see, why would they ask him to prophesy who slapped him? But then in the Gospel according to Luke, it says they blindfolded Jesus and they asked him to prophesy. Now that doesn't mean Matthew was wrong. No, they are just complementing one another. But then I will give you one passage from the Gospels that might seem like contradiction. And is related to the narration about the transfiguration of Jesus, which is recorded in Matthew chapter 17, 1 to 8, Mark chapter 9, verses 2 to 10, and Luke chapter 9, verses 28 to 36. The Gospel according to Matthew and the Gospel according to Mark says that this transfiguration happened 6 days after Peter declared Jesus Christ to be the Son of God, while Luke says 8 days. But then, are these contradictions? Not at all. Luke does not say, Matthew and Mark, you have it wrong. It is 8 days. That is not what Luke writes. Neither does Matthew or Mark write, Luke, you have it wrong. It is supposed to be 6 days. But then what happened? Did Luke make a mistake? I don't believe so. The information did not originate from Luke. Somebody gave him that information. And when it comes to things like days, how many days after, how many days before, people can make mistakes about that. But make no mistake, all of them agree that the transfiguration of Jesus Christ happened. All of them agree on that fact. Now, the next test we can use is the archaeological evidences. The places mentioned in the Gospels either existed in the 1st century or are still in existence today. For instance, there is the pool of Bethesda that was talked about in some of the Gospel accounts where Jesus Christ healed a lame man that was lame for about 30 to 35 years. Guess what? In 1888, a German archaeologist, now I'll just spell his name because I'm unable to pronounce it, Conrad, then Schick. He identified a pool close to the sheep gates in Jerusalem, and he identified it as the pool of Bethesda as described in the Gospels. So we can tell that these accounts that were recorded in the Gospels are indeed true. Now, one final test. There can be many more that you can use to prove whether the Gospels are historically accurate and reliable. There are many other tests that you could come up with to know. But one other one is manuscript evidence. You see, the number of early Greek manuscripts of various portions of the Gospel is more than 5,000, which implies that people believed the account in all of these Gospels and wanted to share different portions of these Gospels to different people and in different places. It's just like when a world event happens and all the news media outlets want to publicize it. That shows that people believe this to be accurate and true. Now, with so many Greek manuscripts available, over 5,000, which is larger than any other number of manuscripts available for any work written in early times. 5,000, and the entire Bible has over 25,000 different manuscripts of various portions from Bible passages. Now, with all of this large number of manuscripts, how do we know which one is accurately copied, which one was not accurately copied? There are textual variances, meaning things like how words are written. For instance, you can have a passage like John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." That is one. Another person can write it this way: "For God loved the world." Now, he did not write "so." "That he gave his only begotten Son." Now, he did not write "one and only." "That whosoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life." Now, one person wrote everlasting, another person is writing eternal. That is textual variance. That does not diminish the context of what is written. You can have textual variance as we have it, but there are no contextual variances. So I can tell you that with all of these tests, you can determine whether the gospel according to Matthew, the gospel according to Mark, the gospel according to Luke, and the gospel according to John are historically accurate and reliable. Now, in conclusion, the gospel account about the life of Jesus can be trusted as eyewitness accounts. And see, they reveal Jesus as God come as a human to be sacrificed for the forgiveness and redemption of mankind. Good announcement that God has come to offer salvation to mankind. That's what the Gospels are all about. And guess what? The Gospels are true. So believe it. Thank you so much for listening to the end of this podcast episode. I hope you learned a lot and can tell people that yes, it is possible to trust the Gospels. That it was not just cooked up or written in some special secluded place by some monks. Not at all. They are eyewitness accounts about the life of Jesus. So please like this podcast, drop your comments, and share this podcast on your various social media platforms. Share it with friends, share it with family, and let people be blessed. Let people have confidence that these gospels are true. Not that somebody will tell them all of these things are fake and they are not able to defend the truth. So spread this podcast out there and let people be blessed also. Thank you once again. Please enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.